Privacy and ethics. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders of the House of Commons. The members can attend in person or remotely using the Zoom application.
1064, the committee is meeting at the request of 4 members of the committee to discuss their request to undertake a study of the Prime Minister's vacation to Jamaica. I'd like to remind all members not to put their earpieces near the microphones as it causes feedback and could cause potential injury to our interpreters. With that being said, the floor is open. Mr. Barrett, go ahead, please.
Well, thanks very much, Chair, and good morning to you and colleagues. I hope that everyone had a restful time with family and was able to catch up with and connect with their communities. It was a challenging Christmas for many Canadians, and we saw record food bank use and, of course, people facing challenges with their home heating bills. I just want to quickly go over a couple headlines, and then I have a motion that I'd like to put forward to the committee chair. Some of the headlines that we saw over this Christmas were high prices, tight budgets have Canadians trimming how they'll celebrate this Christmas. Montreal Soup Kitchen may have to stop feeding homeless for the first time since 1877. All I'm doing is working and paying bills, why some are leaving Canada for more affordable countries, and the rising cost of living means this mom of 3 goes hungry so her kids can eat. So it has been a challenging time for many people, and it's of course heartbreaking to see the struggles that our fellow Canadians are going through. 2 more headlines. Trudeau'S office won't answer questions on $84,000 vacation. Trudeau given free stay at $9,300 a night luxury Jamaican villa over Christmas holidays. And this is, of course, what brings us here. And those numbers are, of course, staggering when we have an $84,000 vacation, when the median Canadian household income is about $70,000. And the problem begins with the first answer or first explanation that the Prime Minister's office gave about this vacation. And this isn't a question about a Prime Minister being deserving of a vacation or anyone being deserving of a vacation if they're able to afford it and they've got the time and their health. That's wonderful that they're able to do that. The problem is that the first answer that the Prime Minister's office gave to Canadians about this was that the Prime Minister was paying for the vacation. And it wasn't until media followed up and learned about the cost of the destination and asked who was paying for it. And the answer was that, in fact, the Prime Minister was not paying for this vacation. So we started with the Prime Minister saying he was paying for it, and then saying that it was being gifted to him. That's a remarkable gift, $84,000, and the question of whether or not a Prime Minister should be accepting gifts worth $84,000 is one that perhaps an eventual study at this committee could consider, if it's ever appropriate. But the story changed again, and the Prime Minister offered a third version of events, saying that he was staying with friends at their place and that he wasn't paying for it. So we know that his office said, the Prime Minister's office said that the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner cleared the vacation. The Ethics Commissioner has since said that that's not a function that they provide. They don't pre-clear vacations. And the Ethics Commissioner cannot release the correspondence between the Prime Minister and his office without the authority to do that, or an instruction to do that, a production order to do that. And that can be resolved, of course, by the Prime Minister just furnishing, Parliament, Canadians with that correspondence, releasing it, demonstrating that that the third story that we got from the Prime Minister was, in fact, the same story that he gave the Ethics Commissioner. The question is, was the Ethics Commissioner deceived or misled in any way? And so we need to get to the bottom of that. The best way to do that would be to have the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner come to this committee. I think that we could look at a number of things, but the precision, of what we need to accomplish. The reason that we're here is to deal with this specific event, this $84,000 gift. It happened to take the form of a vacation, and so that's why I have the following motion to move. I have it in both official languages. The clerk should have received a copy of it, and very simply, Chair, that the interim Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner appear at the earliest opportunity regarding the Prime Minister's vacation to Jamaica.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Barrett. The motion has been moved. The clerk has advised me that she has sent it to the members of the committee in both official languages. And I suspect, Mr. Barrett, just for clarity, that that's for one meeting, correct? Just yes, for one meeting. Okay. Good. The motion has been moved. I've got Mr. Brock, followed by Ms. Khalid, and then Ms. Damoff after that. Go ahead, Mr. Brock.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to start at the outset by wishing all my colleagues a Happy New Year. I hope that everyone had an enjoyable, relaxing time away from the Hill. A few of us, unfortunately, are back earlier than we anticipated, but this is an important issue, not only for parliamentarians, but it's an important issue for Canadians. As my colleague, Mr. Barrett, has indicated, 2024 has not started off on a new footing. It's essentially the same sort of issues that Canadians are dealing with in 2023 and 2022, and that's the issue of affordability. I know personally many members of my constituency who wrote to me and expressed their astonishment that how tone deaf this Prime Minister and this Liberal government was in light of all of the issues that Canadians are facing, that he would find it appropriate to accept an $84,000 gift for an extremely extravagant holiday in Jamaica. I think we are all of the same belief, and I believe all Canadians are of the same belief, Mr. Chair, that the Prime Minister is indeed worthy of a vacation. He is indeed worthy of spending quality time with his family. He was born of privilege. He maintains a lifestyle of privilege. It's now no shock to anyone here at this committee or in this House or across Canada that he is well connected with terms of friends and other associates around the world, and he probably enjoys staying at locations that offer some of the finer things in life. We don't begrudge that as a starting point. What we do begrudge is how a particular issue such as this has blown up to such an extent that it now has the makings of a scandal. This was a really non-issue from the get-go. If the Prime Minister and his office were completely transparent as to who sourced this particular vacation, how it was communicated to the Prime Minister, all the terms associated with he accepting the offer to stay at this luxurious villa, had he been upfront with Parliament, had he been upfront with Canadians right from the outset, I don't think we'd be here today. But the Prime Minister and his office have compounded this particular issue as such that we as parliamentarians are here asking for clarification. And you know, Mr. Chair, this isn't a one-off. This is a pattern of conduct with this Prime Minister and his office to mislead Canadians. Setting aside the controversy surrounding his trip to the Aga Khan Island and how he was found guilty of breaching the ethic guidelines, he promised Canadians in the House that he would do better, that he would communicate in advance with the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner and be upfront because the hallmark of the Trudeau brand, the hallmark of the Trudeau government is transparency. That's what he promised Canadians during the 2015 general election. You vote for me, you will have the most open, transparent, and accountable government this country has ever seen. Has that happened, Mr. Chair? Absolutely not. I really don't know if anyone on the Liberal bench, and certainly the Prime Minister, even understand the definition of transparency. But most recently, the government has shuffled some positions. One of the shuffling of positions was the House Leader, the government House Leader, who is now occupying that position by the name of Steve McKinnon. Steve McKinnon was asked by the press with respect to this vacation. He indicated as follows: the Prime Minister, and this is a quote, the Prime Minister followed all the rules and in fact got his travel plans pre-approved by the Commissioner. We know that's a lie. It's misleading. It was deliberate. It was intentional on Mr. McKinnon's part to mislead Canadians. Because now we know that that office, the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner, does not pre-approve and give permission to vacation. The issue is whether or not the form of a gift qualifies as an acceptable one under the Act. To clarify, he says, the office, no, I'm sorry, that's the quote from the Ethics Commissioner. But he went on in a different interview, this is Steve McKinnon, the government House Leader, and it said as follows: I think Canadians don't want to deny the Prime Minister the ability to take a Christmas vacation with his family, and that's what he did. McKinnon told reporters last week, all of the rules have been followed, and the law has, as one of its fundamental pillars, transparency, which is, of course, the reason why we're discussing this today. The Prime Minister has acted transparently. Are we to accept the House Leader's word for that? I think that would be negligent. I don't think we'd be doing our job as His Majesty's loyal opposition to accept that at face value, in light of the fact that the office has since rebutted the position taken by the Prime Minister and his office that this was pre-approved. There's a lot of smoke here, Mr. Chair, and I'm sure there is a fire that's burning, Mr. Chair, that we need to find out its source. As I indicated, this is not a one-off. It is a series of missteps by this government. I talked about the Aga Khan vacation. We then had the dress-up clown show in India. We then had the issue surrounding the very first Truth and Reconciliation Day. Again, one of the hallmarks of the Trudeau brand and our Prime Minister in the 2015 election was his pronouncement that there was no other relationship that was more important to Canada than its relationship with Indigenous Canadians. He created the very first Truth and Reconciliation Day after the discovery of the unmarked graves in Kamloops. This was an important milestone in the history of this country in an effort to broker reconciliation between non-Indigenous and Indigenous alike. What did the Prime Minister do? The Prime Minister instructed his office to lie to Canadians, to say that he was in Canada engaging in private meetings, when in fact, some sleuths in the Canadian public were able to track his flight and realize he wasn't in Ottawa. He was en route to BC to take a surfing vacation.
Point of order, Chair. Point of order, Chair.
Go ahead, Ms. Damoff, on your point of order. And as it relates to the standing orders, I'd like to just some clarification on that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, twice now the member has said that the Prime Minister lied, and I think we all know that that is not allowed under parliamentary rules. So I just wondered if you could remind him that he can't say that the Prime Minister lied. If that could just you could remind the honourable member of that, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Damoff. I'm going to ask Mr. Brock just to be a little more judicious in his words.
The
Thank you.
Prime Minister was deceitful to Canadians, Mr. Chair. So instead of telling the truth that he, in fact, was in Ottawa, engaged in private meetings, he furthered his own selfish private interests in taking a surfing vacation on the very first day that he created. It was embarrassing, and it was shameful, and it was an event that should not have happened. So again, these are things that I wanted to bring to the attention of this committee, that this Jamaican Christmas vacation is not a one-off. It displays a pattern of miscommunication and deceit by the Prime Minister's office, giving 3 different versions of the truth as to what they communicated to the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner. And we as parliamentarians, but more importantly, Canadians from coast to coast to coast, need some daylight shed on this issue. And for all of those reasons, I support my colleague's motion.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Brock. On the motion, I do have a list. I have Ms. Khalid, followed by Ms. Damoff, suivi par Monsieur Gourde, et Madame Fortier après Monsieur Gourde. Ms. Khalid, go ahead, you have the floor. On the motion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I think on the motion, I think it's important for us to understand the context of it. So if it's okay with you and through you, Mr. Chair, I'd like to ask Mr. Barrett, I know that he had written to the Conflict of Interest Commissioner. He had written a letter. I'm just wondering if he had gotten a response and what that response was. And if that's okay, once I get the answer from Mr. Barrett, I'd like to take the floor back.
Mr. Barrett, do you have a response for Ms. Khalid or not?
I'd say that the most relevant point from the commissioner's response was that he's not able to share correspondence, if there was any, between the Prime Minister's office and his office. And so, hearing from the Ethics Commissioner and then being able to make a decision as a committee on if we were going to have documents produced, the committee deciding if we were going to have a review of the act. These are all things that we can do, but it's not something that the commissioner can do proactively.
Thank you. Go ahead, Ms. Khalid. You have the floor.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Chair. I'm quite perplexed, actually. I mean, on the one hand, we give the Conflict of Interest Commissioner the ability, the privilege to look into and to consult with each member of Parliament, each elected official's affairs, to help them and guide them in how we conduct our affairs in the most ethical, the most transparent manner. And so, as Mr. Barrett had written to the Ethics Commissioner on this specific issue, it would be really nice to see, because this matter is now before the committee, what the actual response was. I would love for Mr. Barrett to share with the whole committee what the Ethics Commissioner responded back to him on these questions that we are all deliberating right now on this emergency meeting on this 106.4. So I'm hoping that Mr. Barrett, on his own accord, would be able to share and just forward, whether through the clerk or to all of our committee members, what the exact response was. It really, I think, calls into question how we conduct ourselves as members of Parliament and the importance of the transparency with which we operate, and the importance of making sure that there is trust in democratic institutions. I mean, over these past couple of days, I've kind of delved into this question of whether, what's the difference between taking a vacation with a family friend, having consulted with the ethics commissioner, letting them know that you were about to do this, and then paying back the flights for it, versus going on a trip with a Hungarian think tank to the United Kingdom and having thousands of dollars worth of fine foods. What is that? Where is that line? I mean, how do we really understand and appreciate what our role is as members of parliament? What is the role of the Conflict of Interest Act? And I think that this is, whether it was, important or not to members of the opposition, I think this is an important question for us to really expand and to understand the nature of the study here, and to understand and appreciate that this is not just about one person. This is about an institution. It is about how we conduct ourselves. How do we ensure that that transparency and the obligation to Canadians exists in how we operate as members of parliament, being in a place of privilege where we have the opportunity to make policy, to advocate on certain issues, and what influences those issues. I mean, I just wonder if a Hungarian think tank would like to influence how we operate here in Parliament, and whether a stake would really implicate or influence what the Conservatives would want to advocate for or not. But I think that perhaps this matter really requires a deep understanding as to how the Conflict of Interest Act really operates within our Parliament, and how we can ensure that transparency exists and that we continue to maintain trust in our democratic institutions, in how we conduct ourselves as members of Parliament. And as I continue to opine on this, Mr. Chair, I just want to again say, I know that Mr. Brock had referred to the House Leader and the new House Leader. I just want to wish the former House Leader, Karina Gould, a very blessed maternity leave as she goes on to have a baby, and just really reconcile with her own family as Mr. and Minister McKinnon goes on to take on her role in an acting capacity as she builds her family. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Khalid. We're going to next go to Ms. Damoff on the motion. Ms. Damoff, you have the floor. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Chair, and colleagues. It's nice to see you. Wishing you all the best for the new year. So I want to start just when Mr. Barrett began his introduction to his motion, he talked about affordability. And, that's a concern that Canadians have. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And that's why, as a government, we have brought in reduced childcare fees. And if you think that that isn't helping families, I know in my own family, the reduction of fees by half here in Ontario has made a huge difference, not just for my family, but for families all across the country. In fact, yesterday I was at the YWCA in Hamilton, talking to, seeing their childcare center, but also talking to the staff about people who've been living in poverty who are now able to access childcare. When it comes to housing, the opposition always neglects to mention that the leader of the opposition has lived in government subsidized housing and then goes out and talks about how we're not doing anything. Well, Monday I was in Burlington, Ontario to announce $21 million for the city of Burlington to accelerate housing in that city. Last month, we announced $55 million in my riding for apartments. It's low interest loans for a developer to be able to build rental units in Oakville. So affordability is an issue, and we acknowledge that, and that's why we're working towards that. One of the things that Mr. Barrett talked about, and Mr. Brock as well, was, about the conflict of interest commissioner. And, Mr. Barrett said that in his response, in his response, the commissioner said that they wouldn't be releasing any documents. Well, rightly so. As a member of parliament, all members of parliament, we have the expectation that when we speak to the ethics commissioner, that information will be held confidential. There's an expectation that when we have those conversations, when we lay out something that we want an opinion on, that's not going to be made public. In fact, if that was to change and those documents were to be made public, quite frankly, no one would consult with the commissioner because there would be a fear that privileged and private and other information could be made public in the future. So that's a fundamental aspect of that office. In fact, as a parliamentary secretary, and as all, I have to file annually report with the ethics commissioner. There's no way that it would be appropriate for those kind of documents to be made public, nor would it be appropriate any time that any MP or the Prime Minister consults with that office that those conversations should be public. There's an expectation that they'll be private. So I think that's critically important for us to remember. And the Prime Minister did communicate with the office before his trip this Christmas, and rightly so. The office has said that they can't share it. So, Mr. Chair, I'm going to leave it there for now. I know that others want to speak to this motion, but I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Damoff. La prochaine.
The next speaker is Mr. Gourd. Mr. Gourd, you have the floor. You may begin. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, everyone. Hello to all my colleagues from the House of Commons today. As a co-signatory of this letter on the parliamentary inquiry into the Prime Minister's trips, I was surprised to hear before the holidays that, after the holidays rather, that the Prime Minister had been staying in a... One moment, please.
Doug?
Thank you. I'm not getting the translation despite having on we can have that looked into and corrected before we proceed. Thank you.
Monsieur Gould, est-ce que...
Mr. Gourd, could you please say a few words in French so that the interpreters can interpret into English? All right, I'll begin again, especially with regard to the most important part, the concerns that I've heard in the media during the holidays. Mr. Aldag,
I'm not sure, you said you were on English, but can you just double check that for us, please? Je m'excuse, Monsieur Gould.
I apologize.
I'm not hearing the interpretation. There was something very brief in the background. It's like it's picking up from another microphone, but it is the floor that I'm hearing despite being on English here.
Our indication is in the room that the interpretation is working. I'm not sure what the problem is on your end, but what we can do is maybe get a technician to give Mr.
If they'd like to give me a call, I'll just go back on mute and we'll sort it out. It's an important conversation. I want to make sure that I'm fully following it. And my French is a work in progress, and I just want to make sure that we're plugged in.
Yeah, and I want to make sure you're following it as well, Mr. Aldag. Okay, I'm going to. Je m'excuse.
I'm sorry, Mr. Gourd. We'll be suspending for a few seconds just to fix Mr. Aldag's technical problem. No problem. Just for a few minutes.
Merci.
We should be back up in a couple minutes here. For anyone that hasn't yet, hit the like and subscribe to help support the channel. Let me know in the chat if you can actually hear me. Okay, perfect, thanks. I was talking at the end of the last stream that I did, but I was on the wrong channel for my microphone, so nothing was coming out. Who's the minister that was talking about having problems with their headset, or they were hearing weird noises or something? Was that a liberal minister? Probably trying to filibust. Perfect. Thanks, Jonathan, for letting me know. Hey, Dirt Farming. Glad to see you. I cannot wait until the House of Commons opens up. I think this year it's going to be spicy for sure. Oh, come on. Just another liberal game, guarantee. Just trying to filibust, waste time, so they can't get to the bottom of the issues. Yeah, it's all a joke. Just a waste of time. A cheat sheet. I wouldn't doubt it. Right? Sometimes when these guys are filibustering like this, they got to realize that they're wasting a ton of taxpayers' money. Like, even conservatives do it. You gotta swap out your name, get a different username. I didn't see Freeland and Dabo's. I tried to avoid the WEF stuff until I'm ready, until it's all done, because I'll go down that rabbit hole and I won't come back up for like a month. Anyone that likes the channel, give me a like and a subscribe. It really helps out. If you're already subscribed and you haven't hit the like button yet, go and do so. It helps get the algorithm going. I always find the liberals have like the most welfare microphones and headsets and cameras. You know they do that on purpose. Thank you very much. That would be hilarious. I would love to see somebody tell Klaus Schwab to go F himself. I wonder what Schwab's reaction would be. Like, he looks like one of those guys that would be like, my word! Oh, God. Yeah, I don't understand it. Liberals are supposed to, like what they said at the beginning, that they were going to be transparent. They are probably the least transparent government I have ever seen in power. Like, you have no idea what they're doing, ever. Nothing. And even after they've done it, they keep everything, a tight lid on everything. There's cabinet confidence, everything. We have a transparent government. Yeah, bullshit. Yeah, transparent. I mean, we don't see shit.
Issue with the interpretation
Finally, we're
fixed. On va recommencer.
We'll go back to Mr. Gord. Mr. Gord, you have the floor. On the motion, please. Go ahead. Thank you very much, Chair. I'll come back to my concerns. Before the holidays, on the Prime Minister's trip, when I learned from the media that a night at that Jamaican villa cost $9,300, and 9 consecutive nights would be $84,000. We know very well that Canadian families earn about $70,000 median household income a year. What I also found worrying was that on December 22nd, the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff said that, or Cabinet rather, said that the Prime Minister would be covering these costs. And yet right after the holidays, well, some Canadians defended the Prime Minister's trip. We learned in another message from the Prime Minister's Cabinet that the Prime Minister and his family would not be paying because they were staying at a resort, a deluxe resort that belonged to a friend of the Prime Minister. This was no doubt a villa that could be rented out to others as well. We are not allowed. Well, we are allowed to receive gifts as MPs, but you have to put a price value on the gift. This is a lot higher than a $40 gift. On January 10th, it was said that it was the main residence of a friend of the Prime Minister. So the message has changed. The Prime Minister we're now saying that it's the new parliamentary House Leader who's saying that the interim commissioner accepted or pre-approved the Prime Minister's trip, yet the commissioner is saying that's not part of his job. We have the impression then that the Prime Minister thinks that Canadians are fools. And this is not the first time that the Prime Minister has had trouble with holiday trips. Of course, we don't want the Prime Minister not to take holidays. He's entitled to take a vacation anyway. But when the vacations are gifts of that amount, then there's a lot that's going on underneath. Did the commissioner give the authorization? Can he give pre-authorization? How did things take place between the two parties? It'd be interesting to know, because we can't not assume our responsibilities and claim that the commissioner should assume them. So I think it's important that the motion go ahead. I think it's important to keep discussing this with all our colleagues on the committee. Thank you, Chair.
Gould, on va commencer avec le débat sur la motion.
We'll continue with the debate on the motion. Our next speaker is Ms. Fortier. Go ahead, please. Thank you, Chair. And now it's my turn to wish everyone a good and happy year, a productive year. I know we've already got our work cut out for us at the Ethics Committee. I hope that I'm eager to begin the studies that we decided on before the holidays. Of course, now we have this issue that we're discussing today. The motion tabled by Mr. Barrett. Well, I think it's important to take this occasion to ask the commissioner to come and share with us how he could educate us, explain to us, because we know, as my colleague Ikra mentioned earlier, that this is a democratic institution. We have to ensure we're following the rules. Perhaps the commissioner could have the opportunity to share the rules on travel and the Conflict of Interests Act. It would also be interesting to know that the Prime Minister was not traveling with a think tank. This was a family and friends trip. This is not a Hungarian think tank. Other members have chosen to travel with a Hungarian think tank. I think the commissioner would have a lot to say on that issue. Here, however, we're talking about a trip with a friend. I think my colleagues have very clearly understood the explanation that we're providing. Mr. Barrett's motion would allow us to have the ethics commissioner for one meeting. This is what I've understood, so that we could ask more specific, detailed questions on travel rules and the Conflict of Interest Act. I think that's would be the most relevant to the committee. Mr. Chair, rather, I'd like to move an amendment to the motion as follows. That the interim conflict of interest and ethics commissioner appear for one meeting regarding the Conflict of Interest Act and rules. That's the amendment I'd like to make. Could you please say the amendment again? I can say it in English as well. I speak the two official languages. Which would you prefer? I'll say it in English if you like. Say it in French if you like. That the interim conflict of interest and ethics commissioner appear for one meeting regarding travel rules in the Conflict of Interest Act.
Okay, merci.
Thank you, Madam Fortier, for that amendment to the motion. Please give us a moment. I'll just speak to the clerk. Fortier.
I needed clarification because the motion itself, the amendment itself is not clear. Are you asking for an additional meeting with the Conflict of Interest Commissioner to come in and discuss this issue, or are you amending it to replace what Mr. Barrett has put?
Exactly. I've moved the amendment to specify why we want the commissioner to appear, and I've also specified that it's one meeting. That was not stated in Mr. Barrett's motion. So the motion is amended to have one meeting and to say specifically that we'll be discussing the travel rules in the Conflict of Interest Act. And I've removed the mention of the Jamaican trip. That's my amendment.
The difficulty with that is that it substantially changes Mr. Barrett's motion. And the difficulty that I have with that is that the motion that Mr. Barrett has presented is very specific to the Jamaica trip. Your motion would substantially change that. Right.
Alors, je garde
All right, I'll keep.
appear for one meeting. I'm adding this regarding the rules for travel in the Conflict of Interest Act. Donc, on enlève the Prime Minister's vacation
Will be removed.
to appear for one meeting regarding the rules for travel, which is a definition of vacationing, in the conflict of interest.
Okay. Just give me a second if you don't mind.
How many times are these guys going to pause?
Okay, I just need some clarification because it is a substantive amendment to Mr. Barrett's motion, because Mr. Barrett's motion is specific to the trip to Jamaica. The purpose of this meeting today, as it relates to the request by the members, is for the trip to Jamaica. So are you suggesting then?
Ben, je suis pas nécessairement d'accord avec vous,
I don't necessarily agree with you, Chair. We're talking about the Interim Commission of Conflict of Interest. I think we all want to meet him. Everyone agrees on that.
Where I need clarification, are you suggesting that all questions would be open if the interim commissioner came before the committee, including the trip to Jamaica? Or are you saying that
on
that's...
parle du voyage. Donc,
We're talking about travel. I think if we're talking about travel rules, that includes trips that any MP could take, including the Prime Minister.
Okay. So I'm going to allow the amendment. Okay. So the amendment is on the floor. I needed clarification. If you know, again, we're dealing specifically with the trip to Jamaica today in the motion that was presented. If when we come back and we have this one meeting with the commissioner, that all trips are open, all sponsored travel, including travel with, that.
under the Act. I think we've add the Act in there.
Right. Okay. So I'm going to allow the amendment. So we're now debating the amendment moved by Madame Fortier. Is there any discussion on this? I see, Monsieur Villemure, je sais que ton...
I know that your hand is raised on the motion tabled by Mr. Barrett. Would you like to speak on the amendment, or would you like to speak on the main motion? You'd like to speak on the amendment? I'd like to speak on the amendment now, but I'd also have a point on the motion. Please go ahead, Mr. Villemure. With regard to the amendment, I like the spirit of the amendment. However, travel and vacations are types of gifts. And if we want to have the commissioner before us, then I think he should also explain his position or the code with regard to gifts that are in travel form or vacation form. The commissioner is someone who's brilliant, who's interesting to hear. I'd just like to hear us to be really able to benefit from his presence, that we not be constricted to travel alone, and that in 6 months we want to talk about gifts. So I move a small amendment, or I propose that there be a small amendment to include gifts.
An amendment.
An amendment on the amendment of Ms. Fortier on gifts. I agree. Ms. Fortier, you agree? All right. The amendment moved by Mr. Villemure, is there any discussion on this sub-amendment? Mr. Blakey is...
We're dealing with that. I'm going to go to Mr. Blakey first because your hand is up on the sub-amendment moved by Mr. Villemure. Mr. Blakey, do you have any discussion on that?
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Yes, please, Chair. I'd ask at this time if it would be possible to have Ms. Fortier's amendment and Mr. Villemure's sub-amendment sent to us. We're starting to have quite a few changes, and without having it before us in writing, it's difficult to move more amendments, perhaps, or to just clearly understand how the different changes to the motion will affect it. That would really help, in other words, if we had the various changes in writing, just so we could receive it in writing in both official languages, please. The clerk is working on this amendment and the sub-amendment right now. We'll suspend for 2 minutes just so that the clerk can send out to you the sub-amendment and the amendment as well. We'll just suspend for 2 minutes. Thank you.
Why can't they just figure this stuff out? Why do they have to suspend every 10 minutes for 2 minutes? It's so true. That's all they do is amend things. It'll be like amend the friggin' whatever it is, and then they'll sub like the sub part of it too. They'll amend, just amend. It's ridiculous. Anyone new to the channel that enjoys the channel, please subscribe and hit the like button. It helps get the algorithm going to get the video out there. It also makes me a little more known to other people, and more likely to be seen on the front of your home of your YouTube. You know, I feel like his 2 minutes are normally really long too. They're like more like 4 or 5 minutes. I guess if I got paid like $300,000 a year, I'd probably suspend every 2 minutes too. What do you guys think? Is this an issue that they should be worried about right now? You know, Trudeau's last vacation? Or should we just forget about it? Let me know in the comments. Right? Who wouldn't love to spend $85,000 on a beautiful villa over Christmas holidays? Yeah, liberals like to act like they don't filibuster anything, but they do it all the time. Even in the House of Commons, you got Kevin and Mark that are constantly filibustering. They do not answer questions whatsoever. What they do is they take their time and they spend the time that they have allotted to them to attack the Conservatives. That's the only thing they do. Like, I don't know how many times in the House of Commons I heard Mark or Kevin stand up and talk about the Conservatives not supporting the Ukraine-Canada trade deal. It's countless times. It's ridiculous. It was like they were trying to embed it in Canadians' heads that there's some wrongdoing there. It's appalling. I think Freeland being a part of the WEF is a giant conflict of interest. When the WEF has been doing everything they can to slide into the United Nations so that they can help influence policy inside of government. Like, the crap behind the scenes that people don't realize is just blows my mind. and how they're allowed to get away with it because nobody calls them out on it. And people are finally starting to wake up and call these idiots out on the scandalous crap that they're doing. Yeah, it's funny you say that because Ezra has somebody there right now. I did see Ezra chase down Kenny and question that guy to death, but that's the only part that I've seen, so I haven't really looked too much into it. I'm gonna probably watch some of it tonight.
The interim Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner appear for one meeting regarding the rules for gifts, vacations, and travel in the Conflict of Interest Act and Code. So that double amended motion has been sent to every member. Mr. Blakey, the only thing that is missing in this is a timeline. And you know I like to deal in timelines. I don't like to leave anything up in the air. So I'm going to suggest if somebody wants to move this at the earliest opportunity be inserted somewhere in there so that we can deal with this in a manner that is quick, okay? And have a meeting relatively in a short period of time. Mr. Blakey, when we left, you were asking for the motion to be circulated as amended twice. It has been. Do you have any other comments on the sub-amendment? Because you still have the floor.
Sure, I will speak just a little bit, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to address both the subject of the meeting and also these particular amendments and sub-amendments. So I guess I just want to start by saying that I certainly do think that this is an issue of interest to a lot of Canadians who see the size and scope of the bill for this vacation, and I think can't help but be struck at the extent to which it's well outside the contemplation of most Canadians to think about spending that kind of money on a vacation. And I think anytime you get different and contradictory answers out of the leader of the government about something like this, it rightly raises a lot of questions and is cause for concern for Canadians. Then the question becomes, how do we get to the bottom of that? And there are two components to that. I mean, I do think there's the question of the extent to which the Conflict of Interest Commissioner is going to look into this, and there's a process for that. I mean, I think one of the reasons that that the trip to the Aga Khan's Island is so well cemented in the minds of Canadians is because a nonpartisan officer of Parliament looked into that trip and made a determination about whether it was appropriate under the Act or not, and determined that, in fact, it was not. And so I think in that case, the credibility of having a nonpartisan officer of Parliament investigate a case and pronounce on it goes a long way to helping inform the conversation and the debate for Canadians. Because I think, whether it's a government politician or whether it's an opposition politician, Canadians are not wrongly skeptical of the claims of politicians regarding these things, and take some level of comfort and reassurance in having a nonpartisan officer of Parliament investigate these matters and, make a determination, which is important in respect to the law, but I think it's also important in terms of Canadians' own opinions and feeling like they have information that they can trust and coming to their own judgments on what actually happened, and then a subsequent judgment in their own mind about the political significance of that and what they think is important. So there's a question of whether the Conflict of Interest Commissioner is going to be looking at this. I think one of the ways to find that out is for the committee to have the opportunity to ask the Conflict of Interest Commissioner. And so I do think it's appropriate to have a meeting where the Conflict of Interest Commissioner can come and, among other things, talk about whether or not the office is contemplating an investigation of this case, because that would establish a nonpartisan process. And of course, in the absence of a nonpartisan process, and we've had some of these kinds of conversations around public inquiries as well, I do think Parliament becomes a more appropriate forum for pursuing some of these things. But where you have a nonpartisan process that Canadians tend to trust more, and that tends to be focused on the relevant facts, with less of the kind of political circus making that can sometimes happen around tables like these. I don't think it will come as a shock to members around this table to know that or to hear that. I think that is a benefit to Canadians, but at least it seems to me that an appropriate starting place is to have a meeting. I do like the idea of expanding the scope of the meeting. I mean, I think we've heard already, and of course, I don't have the content of the full response to Mr. Barrett from the Conflict of Interest Commissioner, but I think we can glean from what he said so far that the Commissioner may be hesitant to get into the exact details of the case because of the nature of the act and the way it's set up, and the way in which the Commissioner is meant to give advice to parliamentarians on these things in a confidential way. So I don't think we should be surprised if the Conflict of Interest Commissioner comes and, in response to detailed questions about this particular trip, is saying things like, well, I'm not at liberty to disclose that, or I can't share that information. And so I think it makes sense to expand the scope of the visit, not to the exclusion of the question about the Jamaica trip, because obviously that's why we're all here, and there's a considerable amount of interest about it. So I think if we were to set up that visit with the interim commissioner in a way that precluded questions about that, I don't think that would serve much of a useful purpose. But on the other hand, to have it only be about that also means that I think we may be setting ourselves up just to get some quite unsatisfactory answers from the Conflict of Interest Commissioner, and be setting expectations that are more likely to produce more of a sense of frustration by Canadians who are tuning in, than to actually provide them with information that they think are useful. And I think that it is the case that what's happened in the case of Jamaica, just as when we talk about sponsored trips and we talk about the I think somebody referred to the trip last June by some Conservative MPs with the $600 of champagne. I mean, people hear about that, they're upset as well. And all of this is governed by the same set of rules largely, or there's rules around sponsored travel, there's rules around gifts. All of these things govern the behavior of MPs. And if there's a solution to this recurring, because I agree with my Conservative colleagues, there is a pattern of behavior here on the part of the Prime Minister, and it may be that what he's doing is permitted by the rules. There's no rule that prohibits an expensive vacation, but there are rules that talk about what it's appropriate to repay and what it's not, or what rate you have to pay. So even if you're taking a government jet, you pay the equivalent of a commercial flight. That was something that Prime Minister Stephen Harper was quick to point out in 2011 when he went to Boston for a Stanley Cup game in a government jet. That was his defense at the time. Look, I'm reimbursing the commercial rate. That's what the rules say. So there's a whole set of rules and infrastructure that govern both the behavior of members of Parliament in this respect, and also government members in this respect. And and especially because there seems to be a recurring pattern of behavior, yes, with this Prime Minister, but also with previous governments who behaved similarly under the existing rules, then we have to talk about those rules as well. Because if we're going to get to some kind of lasting solution, if we're going to get to a place where Canadians aren't regularly reading in the news about sensational trips that cause them to feel that something untoward is going on, whether the price tag of the vacation itself is what people are upset about and object to, or also this question of, well, I was staying with a friend. Was it a gift? Was it not a gift? If it was a gift, what does that mean in terms of either conflict of interest or perception of conflict of interest, which is just as important when we're talking about conflicts of interest. And I think it's important to remind people on Parliament Hill, because this sometimes gets lost, that it's not the fact of an actual conflict of interest that meets the threshold. It's also whether there's a reasonable perception of conflict of interest. And that's what it means to be held to a higher standard. Something that my Conservative colleagues rightly pointed out, Prime Minister made a lot of hay about in 2015 when he was first elected, that he wanted to be holding himself to a higher standard. They would hold members of his government to a higher standard. When you're holding yourself to a higher standard in respect of conflicts of interest, that means to hold yourself to the standard of perception of conflict of interest. So when you accept an $80,000 or $90,000 stay at a very nice place somewhere in the world for a family vacation, there are questions that come up about whether a sense of reciprocal obligation is created by accepting a vacation like that. So all that to say, I don't think it makes sense to try and talk about this incident to the exclusion of the rules that govern all of our behavior as members of Parliament in this regard, or the rules that govern government members more specifically, because there are additional rules for members of government commensurate with their additional responsibilities as members of the executive. So we have to talk about that infrastructure. We have to talk about those rules, as well as being able to ask questions about the particular case. And I say again, I mean, I don't know that we'll get a lot of great answers, particularly if the office is contemplating an investigation. And if they are, it seems to me that the committee will also have the opportunity then to talk to the conflicts of interest commissioner after an investigation. So once the conflict of interest commissioner has established some facts and rendered an opinion on it, that would certainly be an appropriate time for the committee to have the commissioner back. So we should start with the first meeting. We should expand the scope. I have some hesitation about, just for my own part, Mr. Chair, and I certainly respect where you're coming from on timelines. I do also like timelines, but as a visitor to the committee, I'm always loath to negotiate timelines at committees where I'm not the regular member, just because as a visitor, I don't have the same cognizance of what other things the committee is studying and how those things interact. So for my part, I kind of like the fact that there's no date at the moment, only so that the permanent NDP member of the committee, when they're available, can engage in those discussions around appropriate timing. But I think it's understood that everyone would like to get to this quickly when Parliament resumes. And I'll just say as well that I think it would behoove us to have some reference to the particular trip that we're talking about here. So I want the expanded scope, but I'm not opposed to the idea that we would mention the Jamaica trip in the motion as well, because I just think, I know we've heard around the table, obviously that's something we're talking about. It's not a big deal. Fair enough. If that's how the committee usually works and there's an understanding on that, certainly won't get in the way of it. But I'm not opposed in principle to the idea of a mention alongside that expanded scope. And I think those things altogether would contribute to the highest likelihood of having a productive meeting whenever it happens. I would expect soon upon Parliament's return, which is only about 10 days away in any event. As Conservatives have said, there is a pattern of behavior here. It's not a pattern of behavior I expect to end abruptly. I think it's likely to continue. These are longstanding rules that have been used not just by this government, but by the last Conservative government at least. So when we talk about relative urgency within a 10-day period, I'm not sure that I think this is something that can't wait for the 10 days to get to regular meetings of the committee. But I really feel like permanent members of the committee are in the best position to decide that question. And I know that we're kind of now in an awkward place where we have an amendment and a sub-amendment. And so we can't have further sub-amendments as a rule of the committee. I stand to be corrected if I'm wrong about that. But my understanding is that usually we can only amend and then sub-amend. So it seems to me we would at least have to pass a sub-amendment in order to have another sub-amendment that would deal with the date. And I think we could get into some long-winded kind of procedural discussions that members in one of the last weeks before returning to our regular business may wish to avoid. Perhaps not, if we want to have a longer-winded procedural discussion about how to move amendments and sub-amendments in respect of setting a date. I'm game for that in the time that we have available. But otherwise, I think we'll have to pass at least one before we could introduce a discussion about the date. And if the goal is to have a motion passed today that does give a mandate to the committee to extend an invitation to the commissioner after some talk, either at this table or informally, about the date that that meeting would take place, then, you know, we may just want to get on with trying to pass a motion. But that, of course, will be at the will of the committee. So I thank you, Mr. Chair, very much for the opportunity just to share some of my own thoughts about why I do think it's important to look both at the particular issue and the larger question of the rules that govern these kinds of vacations or sponsored trips or whatever, these things that come up that are of interest to Canadians, as well as my thoughts on the particular motions today and how the committee ought to proceed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Blakey, and appreciate your comments on the timeline. We have in the past at this committee, at least from the clerk and the analyst perspective, found some difficulty if we don't actually put a timeline on it. And so what I'm going to suggest to the committee is that, you know, obviously we don't want to put a specific date to it, but I would suggest if we can find consensus, to have it at the earliest opportunity when the House resumes. I think that would provide some clarity, at least to the clerk and the analysts, on the planning that we have to do for the meetings of the committee. So if I can get some consensus from committee members, we don't have to move an amendment, but just some direction from the committee that as soon as possible after the House resumes, I think if we could find that consensus, then that would help us with some direction. Ms. Khalid, I have you on the amendment. Are you discussing?
On the point that you're talking about
Okay,
right
please go ahead. Yeah.
Thanks, Chair. I think maybe it's prudent for us to vote on the amendment and then the motion, and then we're talking about logistics in terms of timing. That is a conversation we can have perhaps in a subcommittee.
In the context of what Mr. Blakey was talking about, I just thought I'd put that out to the committee for consideration, but we can deal with that at the appropriate time. So we're still on the sub-amendment by Mr. Villemure. I don't see any further discussion. Can we find consensus on the sub-amendment from Mr. Villemure? Okay, I see heads nodding, thumbs up. Okay, so the sub-amendment passes. On the amendment from Madame Fortier to Mr. Barrett's motion, Mr. Barrett, you had your hand up?
We'll just move through this first.
Okay, so on the amendment of Madame Fortier, I'm looking to get some consensus from the committee members on that. I see it. Thumbs up on Zoom. Okay. So now we're back to the main motion as amended by the previous amendments. Mr. Barrett, I'm going to go to you on the main motion as amended, sir.
Yeah, thanks, thanks, Chair. So I do want to just emphasize that with the amendment that happened, you previously had clarified that the subject of the Jamaica gift would be fair game for that meeting. So can you confirm that that's what you said?
I think that's precisely what I said.
Okay.
And I think Mr. Villemure's sub-amendment addresses that particular issue: gifts, vacations, and travel. Okay. So to be very clear, that would be part of it, Mr. Barrett.
So thank you for that clarification. And Mr. Villemure's sub-amendment was very helpful because this is really a question about gifts. This is an $84,000 gift. And I think it's important to re-emphasize what Mr. Blakey had said about not expecting that things were going to change anytime soon. And I want to offer you a quote from today from the Prime Minister. When asked about this, he said, and the Prime Minister said, and I quote, "I know that over the holidays many Canadians stayed with friends, and I don't see any questions about that." End quote. Well, that demonstrates a complete, either a disingenuous response or a complete lack of understanding of why this is an issue. It's an $84,000 gift to a sitting Prime Minister, a Minister of the Crown. So the precision in the motion as amended to talk about both the code and the act are fine, because MP travel is not the same as ministerial or prime ministerial travel. So now that that's opened up to include both, that's fine to have that conversation. But it is also a question, not just that the Prime Minister went somewhere. It's that he accepted an $84,000 gift. He didn't sleep on a couch at Uncle Buck's place. So I appreciate the amendments to it, but I really don't think that the seriousness of this has landed for Prime Minister Trudeau, and I hope that hearing from the Ethics Commissioner will help reinforce the legal obligations that designated public office holders have with respect to the Act.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Mr. Villemure, was it?
Mr. Villemure, are you ready to speak? Go ahead, please. On the motion. Thank you, Chair. When it comes to ethics, you have to be careful not to have preconceived notions. I think we need to be humble or have humility when we examine this. But what bothers all of us, I believe, is that we've heard several versions of the same story from the Prime Minister or the Prime Minister's entourage. And this prevents us from figuring out what exactly happened. It is clear that we can't and should not stand in for the Commissioner. The Commissioner's job will be to respond to what Mr. Barrett has moved, and he will decide whether there will be an investigation. But let's not forget one thing. The bill was created in 2006 and the code in 2007. Times change, circumstances change. I think it would be a good idea to ask the Commissioner whether it would be appropriate to review or revise some of those provisions on gifts, on travel, on vacations. What was usual at a certain time may not be today. Life hasn't simply stopped. We could perhaps undertake to revise this act with the Commissioner's suggestion. The Commissioner has to decide, however, where there are grounds for an investigation, and there may one day be the results of an investigation that we could discuss. But for the time being, let's be careful. We need to be working without prejudices, but simply with the facts which for the time being are not clear to us. I think if there's anybody who can clear it up, it's the Commissioner once he explains to us the rules on gifts, travels, and vacation. If there is an investigation that is launched, then we will have the results in due time, and we can discuss them then. Thank you, Mr. Villemure.
Any other hands? Sorry, Mr. Blakey, I do see yours. Go ahead, sir.
That's all right. I just didn't want to preempt anyone else who hadn't had the opportunity to speak already, so I thought I would wait to raise my hand until it was clear that no one else did. And I guess I just want to test with the room one more time that there is an understanding that the Jamaica trip that was most recently taken certainly is something that we can ask the Conflict of Interest Commissioner about when the appearance happens, notwithstanding whatever answers the Commissioner may be able to provide to the committee at that time. So I know, there was a significant change in the wording of the motion, and I just want to make sure one last time that everyone in the room is satisfied that members who want to ask those questions will be able to ask those questions when the Conflict of Interest Commissioner appears, just so that level of comfort is there for everyone.
Mr. Blakey, and it certainly is the chair's perspective in a question from Mr. Barrett that the trip to Jamaica would be on the table when the interim ethics commissioner does appear. And in your comments, there were heads nodding in the room, and I think everyone is very clear that trip can be questioned to the ethics commissioner. Okay, just to clarify that for you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so we're on the main motion. I do again need an understanding from the room that we are going to deal with this at the earliest opportunity. Once the House resumes. If that's clear to everyone? Clear? Monsieur Villemure?
Mr. Villemure?
Okay.
But we do know we have Mr. Villemure's study, we have the RCMP to deal with that seemed to be urgent before. So do you want to have a subcommittee to discuss how we're going to prioritize?
I think if it's the direction of the committee at this point that we're going to do this at the earliest opportunity, if you can leave it to myself, the clerk, and the analyst when the House resumes, if you can leave it to the clerk, myself, and the analyst to determine when that's going to be, then we will deal with it, okay?
Yeah, my only issue is Matt Green's not here and he's part of the committee. So that's the only issue.
Okay, so I'll make sure that I circle back with Mr. Green after his trip to Gaza, okay? So, we are on the main motion as amended. Do we have consensus on the main motion as amended, or do we need a vote?
Could we have a recorded division, Mr. Chair?
We certainly could, if you requested, Mr. Blakey. The clerk is prepared. We're going to have a recorded division. Go ahead, Madam Clerk. Recorded vote.
The vote is on the motion from Mr. Barrett as amended. Mr. Baines.
Yes.
Ms. Damoff.
Yes.
Mr. Aldag.
Yes.
Madame Fortier. Oui. Ms. Khalid.
Yes.
Mr. Barrett.
Yes.
Monsieur Gourde.
Oui.
Mr. Duncan.
Yes.
Monsieur Villemure.
Oui.
Mr. Blakey.
Yes.
10 yeas this week.
Okay, thank you. The motion as amended passes. Mr. Barrett, I saw your hand. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. The question from Ms. Khalid earlier about correspondence with the Ethics Commissioner is important because what we're looking for is confirmation that what the Prime Minister's office ultimately said to Canadians on their third attempt was the truth. And if that's the truth, that's the same truth, if there can be more than one version of it, that was given to the Ethics Commissioner's office. So those are confidences that belong to the Prime Minister, and only he can disclose what was said between the Ethics Commissioner's office and his office. So I, with that in mind, and knowing that the Ethics Commissioner can't speak to things that are protected by those confidences, I'd move the following motion. The committee order all correspondence, including emails, text messages, messages sent on any electronic messaging applications, phone call logs, handwritten notes, memorandums, briefing materials, any documents produced regarding the Prime Minister's travel to Prospect Estate in Jamaica in 2023-24 and 22-23, and that the Prime Minister's office and Ethics Commissioner's office provide the clerk of the committee with these documents within 7 days of this motion being adopted. Chair, I've circulated that in both official languages to the clerk, and I think that only with that information can we have a fulsome conversation with the Ethics Commissioner, the agreed upon timeline to have that hearing once the House resumes would allow for this information to be received by the clerk prior to that, and I think that because there's been a change in the story 3 times, that we get that we find out if there's been a deception that was made to the Ethics Commissioner.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Barrett. The motion's in order. It has been or will be circulated shortly to the committee members, Madam Clerk.
It's done.
It's done. Okay, so you should have that in your mailbox. On the motion as proposed by Mr. Barrett, Ms. Khalid, go ahead, please. And then I see Ms. Damoff after that.
Thank you, Chair. And just to clarify, I know Mr. Barrett may have misunderstood what I had asked earlier. My specific ask to Mr. Barrett was to seek a response based on his consent as to his correspondence with the Ethics Commissioner on this specific topic that we have spent 2 hours discussing today, and what the Ethics Commissioner had responded to him, and if we could see that correspondence back. I know that Mr. Barrett had referred to part of that correspondence in his remarks later on after I had made the request. And I would, again, put it to Mr. Barrett, if he feels so willing, if he wants to share what specifically the Ethics Commissioner had said in his initial inquiry on this matter. I think it's quite on topic for the committee to see what that response was. On the general topic, Chair, on this motion, the Ethics Commissioner, I believe, provides a bit of a consultation role to ensure that members of Parliament and elected officials are providing, or that the Ethics Commissioner is providing the rules and consultation on how to best act, and to ensure that there is a continued trust in the democratic process. And it kind of is paramount to ensure that solicitor-client privilege type consultation continues to exist. I think that we would be setting a very bad precedent if we started to go down this road of asking the Ethics Commissioner or any other elected official to share their correspondence with the committee, to make public what their correspondence is, when the nature of the correspondence, regardless of what it is to seek advice from the Conflict of Interest Commissioner to ensure that we are abiding by the rules, that we are conducting ourselves in a fair process, that we are conducting ourselves in a transparent process, and continuing to ensure not just the lack of conflict of interest, but also the perceived conflict of interest lack as well. So I think that that this motion to produce documents would set a very bad precedent. I'm sure Mr. Barrett would not like for his correspondence with the Ethics Commissioner and any advice he has sought from the Ethics Commissioner to become public, to be presented to this committee, just as much as I think any member of Parliament, not just part of this committee, but any member of Parliament, any elected official would like to see that private consultation become public. So, Chair, I given my remarks, I'm quite opposed to this, not because I have any doubt in what would come out of this correspondence or this release of documents, but more with respect to the precedent that it would set in terms of that solicitor-client privilege, that ability for a member of Parliament to consult with the Ethics Commissioner, which is their role to ensure that we are conducting ourselves as elected officials in a manner that not only complies with the code, but also ensures that there is that perceived lack of conflict of interest as well. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Khalid. We're going to go to Ms. Damoff next, suivi par Monsieur Villemure.
And then Mr. Villeneuve.
Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll be very brief. I just want to put on the record that Section 22 says the Commissioner also provides confidential advice to the Prime Minister about conflict of interest and ethics issues. And I'll underline confidential. I think my colleague, Ms. Khalid, spoke quite well about why this needs to be confidential, but it is in the act as well. So I'll just leave it there and turn it over to the next speaker, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Damoff. Monsieur Villemure, la parole est pour...
Mr. Villeneuve, you have the floor. Thank you, Chair. It is clear that the Commissioner can explain the rules to us. The Commissioner will not give his blessing or his opinion on a specific case, but he'll be ready to explain the rules. It's important to hear what he has to say, but to be able to do so, there will have to be confidential information shared. Confidentiality allows us to maintain confidence in a system, however. Of course, as far as I'm concerned, this motion will not be supported. I find it absolutely disproportionate to what we have to achieve here, to what must be achieved. And I'd invite my colleagues to do the same. We want the commissioner to be able to maintain confidence in the system, and this motion does not make sense if that's our objective. Thank you, Mr. Vermeer.
Else, so Mr. Blakey, I see you now. Go ahead, Mr. Blakey, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I do just want to take a moment to express some reservations that I have. When we think about the Office of the Conflict of Interest Commissioner, I think one of the important functions that it serves, in addition to the function I think Canadians know it most well for, which is to conduct investigations and pronounce on the conduct of either members of Parliament or members of the government, depending on the rules at play. And of course, that's where many of us as Canadians know the Conflict of Interest Commissioner best through interviews that usually they're doing after either at the outset of some kind of investigation that's been triggered or at the conclusion of an investigation. I made reference earlier, for instance, to the Conflict of Interest Commissioner's findings in respect to the Prime Minister's vacation at the island of the Aga Khan. So those are the kinds of things, those are the moments in the work of the Conflict of Interest Commissioner where I think Canadians get to know them best. But one of the really important day-to-day functions of the Conflict of Interest Commissioner is to provide advice to members of Parliament if they think that they might be in a situation of conflict of interest, or if they've been offered something and they're not sure whether it runs afoul of the rules around gifts and things like that. And I think we have to take very seriously the risk that if parliamentary committees are going to start ordering the production of communication between members of Parliament and the Conflict of Interest Commissioner, that we're going to undermine members' confidence in the idea that they can go to the commissioner to get advice on these kinds of matters. Because at that point, they have to wonder if when they're sharing things that they're going to the Conflict of Interest Commissioner because they're concerned that if they were to proceed in a certain way and it became public, that it would be a problem, or that they proceeded in a certain way and it didn't become public, it would nevertheless break the rules. And so they're trying to do the right thing to make sure that there doesn't become an issue. If members don't seek that advice, I think we're going to create a political culture where we're more likely to see breaches of the rules because members don't feel that they have a safe place to go for advice. Now, all that said, it's not to say that members are free to break the rules and not have it come to light. In fact, what this committee is doing is saying, hey, there's the perception that maybe a rule has been breached. That should be forwarded to the Conflicts of Interest Commissioner. It has been by a member of this committee, which is the appropriate action. The committee has met in order to discuss this thing. The committee has agreed to call the commissioner here in order to talk about as much as they can about this case, but I think also to find out if the Conflict of Interest Commissioner will be opening its own investigation. The committee will have an opportunity at the conclusion of an investigation in order to talk to the commissioner. I think proactively and preemptively releasing all of the communication between a member and the Conflict of Interest Commissioner really risks undermining confidence in the office for members, which means that they won't go and seek the advice that they should be seeking in order to help guide their behavior. And so, if at some point down the road, if the commissioner investigates it and it looks like they did a terrible job, which I think would be out of character, as I say, in respect to the trip to Aga Khan Island there, I think a lot of people were satisfied with the level of work that the office did, and there's been other examples of people being satisfied with that work. If down the road it really felt like there was a need for further investigation and to get to the bottom of that communication, the committee can consider that at that time. I think for now, we do already know that the Prime Minister's office has been offering inconsistent answers. And so I don't know, what's important to me is whether the Prime Minister broke these rules or not. And what's important to me is whether the rules are good enough whether we feel that the rules are adequate to the task of preventing members from accepting inappropriate gifts. Those are the things that we've called the commissioner to come talk about. We can already see that the Prime Minister's office is doing a bad job of being accountable to Canadians. We can already see that the Prime Minister's office has given inconsistent answers. We don't need to see the emails and potentially undermine the confidence that members have in the office in order to be able to establish that. That's established. Now the question is, notwithstanding the pontifications of the PMO and and the position of the day, whether those rules, first of all, were broken and whether those rules were adequate. And it seems to me that the committee has a track to answer those important questions, which are the questions. So for the moment, I think a preemptive document disclosure risks more than Canadians stand to gain from that. And I think hearing from the commissioner whether the commissioner intends to proceed with an investigation, what the scope of that investigation would be, I think the committee should hear that before they decide to order up these documents, given what it could mean for the long-term integrity and confidence in the Office of the Conflict of Interest Commissioner.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Blakey. Ms. Khalid, followed by Mr. Duncan. Go ahead, Ms. Khalid.
Thanks, Chair. I would actually, I think Mr. Blakey spoke quite eloquently about the precedent that such disclosure would set, about the importance of members of Parliament and elected officials being able to rely on the Ethics Commissioner for true advice on how to better conduct themselves to ensure that there's transparency, that there is, based on their behavior, continued building of public trust. And that to reiterate Section 48 in terms of confidentiality, to make sure that that relationship between these three stakeholders, which is the elected official, the ethics commissioner, and the public, continues to find its balance. And so I would leave it at that, although I did want to speak a little bit more. I will not, given that Mr. Blakey has done such a great job with really highlighting the importance of this. So again, would reiterate that I do not support this motion and will look forward to the vote sooner rather than later.
Mr. Duncan.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the chance to speak in and weigh in on Mr. Barrett's motion here today. And a few points I think are important for Canadians to understand here, and I think, frankly, to refute what the Liberals and the NDP are offering in terms of the standard that could be set here. I think it's important to remind ourselves, particularly the Liberals and NDP, that we're here in the circumstance here of this issue and another scandal involving Prime Minister taking vacations or taking gifts, in this case, a free gift of a vacation luxury rental around $85,000, is the fact that his story and the Prime Minister's office story has changed 3 times. Right. And let me give an example, Mr. Chair, of this, or the concern or frustration that I have with this, is that if I go to the Ethics Commissioner, the Prime Minister goes to the Ethics Commissioner and says, I'm taking a vacation, am I allowed? And gets a yes, then they go and say, well, we already got pre-approval by the Ethics Commissioner. The question now, and particularly important for Canadians, is the fact that the story changed 3 times. It's important for Canadians in this committee to know and to see the documentation of what has happened and the changing story. What exactly did they provide in context to the Ethics Commissioner?
Sorry, Mr. Duncan. We have a point of order from Ms. Khalid on the standing orders. Which one is it?
It's on, well, I just wanted to clarify one thing, that the Ethics Commissioner does not give clearance. They provide advice on how to. So I would just like to advise the member on that.
Great point. Go ahead, Mr. Duncan.
Well, I find that very interesting because it was the government House leader that used the word pre-approved, checked with the Ethics Commissioner, got advice, got guidance. But I think
Mr. Duncan has the floor. Go ahead, Mr. Duncan, please.
I think especially telling that the Liberals are riled up about this, because the Prime Minister could proactively table the information to this committee to clarify if there's nothing to see here. The trust but verify, go and show what he asked and what he provided the information to the Ethics Commissioner. His story changed to Canadians 3 different times.
what did he provide the ethics commissioner? Did his story to the ethics commissioner change 3 times? And I think that's very important. So if the Liberals are going to fight over advice or guidance or using the government house leader if it's pre-clearance or pre-check, whatever it may be, the Prime Minister could address this proactively and provide those documents to show clarity and to put an end to part of this. And he refuses to do so, and now the Liberals and NDP are refusing to do the same thing. So I would just say, Mr. Chair, to refute the points of the Liberals and NDP here, this is not a blanket opening of the advice and being provided to any MP. We're doing this, and we're here at this meeting today, and we're having this conversation in these meetings because the Prime Minister changed his story 3 times, and it's important to know when they said they talked to, whatever term they want to use, to the Ethics Commissioner, it's important to know the context or the lack thereof the Prime Minister gave. If the Prime Minister and his office gave the same changed story 3 times that he did to Canadians, there's a problem here. We deserve to see the paper trail, and there should be no reason in this case, because the Prime Minister, again, changed his story 3 times, he should proactively provide it if there's nothing to hide. The fact they're blocking this and hiding behind things, I think, has Canadians wondering what exactly is up.
Madame Fortier.
Je vais laisser faire.
Never mind, I'm ready to vote.
I have Mr. Blakey who has his hand up. Go ahead, Mr. Blakey.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And just by way of response to Mr. Duncan, I mean, I think one of the things that he himself pointed out here is that and it is kind of odd to have the Liberals interject on this because it was initially the story that came out of the House Leader's office, I believe, is that the Conflict of Interest Commissioner doesn't pre-approve things. I mean, I know this from my own experience where, folks have offered me a $20 ticket to something in the riding, and I've contacted the Conflict of Interest Commissioner's office to say, it doesn't seem like a big deal. It's a riding event. They're offering to have me come. Could I accept this $20 ticket in order to get in to this community event that I've been invited to go to? And I was surprised at the fact that I couldn't get an answer one way or the other. I was happy to follow whatever the direction was. There was no direction, so I can't imagine that that the idea that a trip was pre-approved is true, because in my own case, I know that even on something relatively straightforward, it's been impossible to get an answer. Now, I'm sharing that information with the committee. I didn't end up going to that particular event, as it happens, but I think it is important that I be able to make those consultations. And so, I mean, I don't think we need to see this documentation to know that that story is not a real story and that answer preferred by the PMO is not the real answer. What I think matters is if the Conflict of Interest Commissioner looks into this. That's what matters. Is the Conflict of Interest Commissioner going to look into this? And if so, what are the findings of the Conflict of Interest Commissioner? I don't need to see a bunch of documents to know that 3 different stories out of the PMO in the space of 2 weeks means that our BS detector should be firing. Absolutely, it should be. It's why we're at this meeting. It's why there's going to continue to be discussion around this. Is it ridiculous to have 3 different answers about the trip come out of government within 2 weeks? Yes, it is. There's no question. I don't need to order up documents to know that something ain't right with 3 different responses in 2 weeks about the same vacation. So it's not about whether we get to the bottom of the fact that something isn't right and that the answers coming out of the PMO not only aren't consistent, but at least 2 of them must not be true, because if any one of those 3 answers are true, the other 2 aren't. So the question then comes back to, were the rules followed, and are the rules adequate? And the person to answer that is the Conflict of Interest Commissioner, the very person who we've already invited. So this isn't about a cover-up. This is about recognizing that, and I appreciate that the Conservatives are saying, look, this is just one member, and it's the leader of government, and that's significant. But it is a precedent, and they know very well how precedents work about this place. I hear Conservatives speak often about their love of the Westminster parliamentary system and the common law and how that works. And how that works is that when you set the precedent, the committee preemptively ordering up communications that are supposed to be privileged for an office that is there as a day-to-day function to provide advice to members on what would be consistent with the code and what wouldn't, you do risk creating a precedent that says that normalizes that practice. And it can have a chilling effect on members' willingness to reach out and contact certain members. I mean, there have been stories about Liberal and Conservative members, for instance, that have rental properties, and particularly in the context of debates about a housing crisis, how appropriate it is to have members who have, who are commercial landlords weighing in on those issues. Well, I respect that they may have gone to the Conflict of Interest Commissioner to get advice on what their participation in those debates should be, what the appropriateness of those holdings are, how to properly disclose their holdings under those rules. And I think it would be, problematic if members felt like suddenly when an issue flares up in the news, that those otherwise confidential communications could be ordered up and made public by a parliamentary committee. I do think that it's part of our job to take that seriously. I don't think that members trying to take that real concern seriously should be dismissed as cover-up. I think there is a way to get the answers to the questions that matter, which are, were the rules broken and are the rules adequate? Those are very public questions. They don't require us to risk the confidentiality of the Conflict of Interest Commissioner's office and the culture of confidence in it among members in order to be able to have a fulsome discussion of those important questions. Were the rules broken and are they adequate? So I don't agree with Mr. Duncan's assessment about my own motives, obviously, in respect of this. I think there are some very serious reasons for being skeptical of a preemptory document request. And these, of course, if the person who ought to be investigating this or who has the rightful authority to investigate this, which is the Conflict of Interest Commissioner, if they're going to investigate this, they have access to those documents. They are aware of those communications. So I think without knowing first whether the Conflict of Interest Commissioner is going to look into this, I don't think the committee should be ordering up these documents. The person who would investigate this, if they're going to go ahead, and as I say, we don't know yet whether they're going ahead, would be the person with whom this correspondence happened. So the appropriate person to investigate this will actually have these documents, does already have these documents. And I don't think the committee should be ordering them up before we even know whether the Conflict of Interest Commissioner is going to be investigating. That just seems to me to be putting the cart before the horse. It's not a cover-up. It's just being aware of what the appropriate procedures are and then acting in a way that supports them rather than undermining them.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Blakey. You said something earlier that I just need interpretation on. What's a BS detector? You don't
it's
have to say
something we could all stand to invest in a little better around Parliament Hill, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for clarifying that. So we're still on the main motion. I don't see any further hands. So we are going to call the vote. I'm going to preempt this by saying that we're going to seek a recorded vote. Mr. Barrett has requested that. Go ahead, Madam Clerk, on the motion by Mr. Barrett.
Thank you. The vote is on the motion by Mr. Barrett. Mr. Baines.
No.
Ms. Damoff.
No.
Mr. Aldag.
No.
Madame Fortier.
No.
Ms. Khalid.
No.
Mr. Barrett.
Yes.
Monsieur Gourde.
Oui.
Mr. Duncan.
Yes.
Monsieur Villemur.
Non, bien évidemment.
Obviously.
Mr. Blakey.
No.
Yeas 3, oui 3, nays 7, non 7.
Okay, so the motion has been defeated. I see Mr. Blakey's hand is up.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Sorry, go ahead.
Yep, please go ahead.
I wanted to say thank you to all of my colleagues on the committee for having brought the issue forward and for having what I think was a good discussion about the most appropriate way for the committee to proceed in respect of this issue. I notice now that we're past the time that we had scheduled for this meeting, and we've dealt with 2 motions, including a motion to call the Conflict of Interest Commissioner to the committee to testify on this issue. And so with that, Mr. Chair, I'd like to move to adjourn.
Mr. Blakey, we have a motion to adjourn. Before we do that, I do want to thank the clerk and the technicians for their work this week in making sure that this meeting happened after we received the letter. And so thank you again to the analysts as well. Thank you, Madam Clerk. We have a motion to adjourn. Okay, all those in favor? I see heads nodding, thumbs up. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
All right, I just want to thank everybody for choosing the channel to watch the committee. Anyone that hasn't already, you would really help the channel by hitting the subscribe and like button. And even sharing will help support the channel too. We need to get the algorithm going so that the channel is seen by more people. Thanks everybody, and have a good night. I'll probably produce a couple more videos later on, which will just be cutouts from the video we had earlier. Yes, everyone. Don't forget that there is another ArriveCan meeting tomorrow that's scheduled in. I believe it's 1 o'clock till 3. I'll have to look, but I'm pretty sure that's the time. So I'll be streaming that again live. So come and join, and we can all chat again. Anyways, have a good night, everybody. We'll see you later.